On Thanksgiving morning, my stepmother's slap echoed through the kitchen like a gavel strike, while my father told me not to be dramatic. The relatives looked away, pretending nothing happened, but my Aunt Margot did not. She slowly untied her sauce-stained apron, placed it on the table, and said clearly, "Enough." I thought she was just stopping a fight, never realizing she had just signaled the destruction of a corrupt family empire built on debts and my forged signature. My name is Kaylee Walker, and I was 29 years old when the illusion of my family finally shattered against the linoleum floor of my father's kitchen. It was Thanksgiving morning in Silverbrook, Minnesota, a town that prides itself on frozen lakes and warm hearths. The air inside the house was thick with the heavy, savory scent of roasting turkey and the sharp, sweet bite of cinnamon and apples bubbling on the stove. In the living room, the volume on the television was turned up too high, broadcasting the roar of a football crowd and the dull thud of helmets colliding, a sound that usually signaled comfort and tradition. For any outsider looking in through the frosted window panes, we were the picture of the American dream. My father, Daniel Carmichael, was the owner of the most prominent lakeside resort in the county. The driveway was packed with cars. The coat rack was overflowing with heavy winter jackets, and the kitchen was a hive of activity. Cousins were stealing pickles from the relish tray. My uncle was mixing drinks with a little too much enthusiasm for 11 in the morning, and the oven timer was ticking away with a rhythmic, domestic persistence. It felt warm. It felt safe, but I knew better. I had grown up in this house, and I knew that the warmth was just a setting on a thermostat, not a reflection of the people living here. I was standing at the granite island, my hands dusted with white flour from rolling out pie crusts. It was a task I did not have to do. I had a career in Minneapolis. I was a senior financial analyst at a major fintech firm. I managed portfolios and assessed risks that would make most people dizzy. Yet, the moment I stepped across the threshold of the Carmichael estate, I reverted to the role I had been assigned 15 years ago. The extra pair of hands, the shadow, the daughter who needed to be useful to earn her keep. Then Lydia walked in. My stepmother, Lydia Carmichael, did not bake. She did not have flour on her hands or sweat on her brow. She swept into the kitchen like a cold front moving across the lake. She was wearing a cashmere sweater the color of heavy cream and dark trousers that were tailored so sharply they looked like they could cut glass. Her hair was a perfect, immobile blonde helmet, and her makeup was flawless, designed to hide the fact that she was nearing 50. Lydia did not look like a woman preparing to feed a family. She looked like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. She did not greet me. She never greeted me. Instead, she bypassed the counter where my Aunt Margot was chopping celery and came straight to where I was standing. She slapped a blue folder onto the flour-dusted counter, right next to my rolling pin. "Sign these," she said. Her voice was light, airy, but underneath the pleasantry was the steel cord of a command. I wiped my hands on a towel and looked at the folder. "What is it?" "Just some tax extensions for the resort," she said, not meeting my eyes. She was already uncapping a pen, holding it out to me as if my compliance was a foregone conclusion. "The accountant needs them filed before Monday, and since you are here, it saves us the courier fee." I hesitated. My instincts, sharpened by years of navigating corporate compliance and risk management, flared. I did not take the pen. Instead, I opened the folder. The document on top was not a standard tax extension. It was a guarantor agreement for a credit line, and the entity listed at the top was not Carmichael Lakeside Retreats. It was something called Silverbrook Horizons, LLC. "Lydia," I said, keeping my voice low so the relatives by the stove would not hear, "this is not a tax document. This is a loan guarantee, and I do not recognize this company name." Lydia let out a short, impatient sigh, the kind one might use with a slow child. "Do not start with your technicalities. Kaylee, it is a holding company for the new spa wing. Your father and I are just restructuring some assets. It is standard procedure. Just sign it." I looked at the papers again. My eyes scanned the fine print. There was a clause about personal liability that made my stomach turn. If I signed this, I was not just witnessing a document, I was tying my financial identity to this debt. I cannot sign this, I said, closing the folder. The kitchen chatter died down slightly. Lydia's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, concentrated venom. What did you say? I said no, I replied, my voice shaking slightly but my posture straight. I am not signing a personal guarantee for a company I know nothing about. If Dad needs a loan, he can use the resort as collateral. He does not need my credit score. Lydia laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Oh, listen to her. The big city financial expert thinks she knows how to run a business. You think you are so special because you have a desk job in Minneapolis? You are nothing without this family. Kaylee, we paid for your college. We gave you everything. The least you can do is help your father when he asks. He did not ask. I pointed out, you are asking, and the answer is no. The room went silent. The football game blared on, oblivious to the tension that had sucked the oxygen out of the kitchen. My cousin stopped stirring the gravy. My uncle froze with a beer in his hand. Lydia stepped closer. She invaded my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and cold ambition. You ungrateful little brat. You think you can come into my house, eat my food, and then disrespect me in front of everyone? Sign the paper. I looked her dead in the eye. No. The slap came out of nowhere. It was not a clumsy, emotional swing. It was a calculated, sharp strike across my left cheek. It cracked through the air like a whip. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, a burning heat that spread from my cheekbone to my ear. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the shock. I was 29 years old. I paid my own mortgage. I managed millions of dollars in assets. And I had just been slapped by my stepmother in the middle of a kitchen full of people. I stood there, frozen, my hand instinctively going to my cheek. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear the grease popping in the roasting pan. Lydia stood her ground, breathing hard, her face twisted in a mask of ugly triumph. She looked at me with utter contempt, waiting for me to crumble, waiting for the tears, waiting for the submission that she had extracted from me for the last 15 years. Then the back door opened, and my father walked in. Daniel Carmichael looked older than his years. His hair was thinning. His shoulders stooped under the invisible weight of a business that had been bleeding money for a decade. He held a glass of scotch in his hand, the ice clinking softly. He looked at me, holding my cheek. He looked at Lydia, who was smoothing down her cashmere sweater as if nothing had happened. "What is going on?" he asked, his voice weary. "Your daughter is being difficult," Lydia said, pointing a manicured finger at me. "She is refusing to help the family. She is trying to ruin Thanksgiving." I turned to my father, my eyes burning. "Dad, she just slapped me. She tried to make me sign a loan guarantee for $4 million, and when I refused, she hit me." My father looked at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. He knew, somewhere, deep down, he knew exactly who he had married. But the moment passed, replaced by the habitual cowardice that had defined our relationship since my mother died. "Kaylee, please," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Do not be so dramatic." I stared at him. Dramatic? She just assaulted me. "Lower your voice," he hissed, glancing around at the staring relatives. "It is a stressful day. Lydia has been working hard to make this perfect for everyone. You know how she gets when she is under pressure. Just apologize to her and let's move on. It is family business. It is not a big deal." I felt the ground fall out from under me. It was not the first time he had chosen her over me, but it was the first time he had done it while the red mark of her hand was still blooming on my face. I looked around the room, searching for an ally. My uncle turned away, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the floor tiles. My cousins busied themselves with their phones. The message was clear. This was the Carmichael way. We ignore the ugliness. We preserve the image. We let Lydia win because it is easier than fighting her. I was alone. The gaslighting was a heavy blanket, suffocating me. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe a slap wasn't a big deal? No, I steadied myself. That was the voice of the victim they had trained me to be. I was not that person anymore. I was about to speak, about to tell them all to go to hell, when I heard a sound that cut through the tension. It was the sound of a heavy ceramic bowl being set down on the table. In the corner of the kitchen, near the sink, stood my Aunt Margot Blake. She was my mother's older sister, a woman who had always been on the periphery of the Carmichael dazzling social circle. She was plain, quiet, and wore clothes that were practical rather than fashionable. She had been chopping vegetables for the last hour, her back to the room, seemingly invisible. Margot had not turned around during the argument. She had not flinched when the slap echoed. But now, she turned. She was holding a chef's knife in her right hand. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the handle. Her face was unreadable, devoid of the polite, anxious smile she usually wore at these gatherings. She looked at Lydia. She looked at my father, and then she looked at me. For a terrifying second, I thought she was going to snap. I saw a flash of something in her eyes that I had never seen before. It was not fear. It was not sadness. It was a cold, hard clarity. Margot walked over to the kitchen island. She moved with a slow, deliberate weight. She placed the knife down on the cutting board with a definitive thud. Then, she reached behind her back and untied the knot of her stained floral apron. The room watched her. Even Lydia seemed unsettled by the sudden shift in focus. Margot pulled the apron over her head, folded it once, twice, and placed it neatly on the counter next to the blue folder. She smoothed the fabric with her hand. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the relatives who were pretending to be invisible, over my father who was nursing his scotch, and finally landing on Lydia. "Enough," Margot said. The word was not shouted. It was spoken at a normal volume, but it carried a resonance that silenced the television in the other room. It was a heavy word, a final word. Lydia scoffed, trying to regain her footing. "Excuse me? Margot, stay out of this. This does not concern you." Margot ignored her. She walked around the island until she was standing next to me. She did not hug me. She did not ask if I was okay. She simply stood there, a physical barrier between me and the rest of them. I looked at her face. I expected to see her trembling. Margot was the peacekeeper. She was the one who smoothed things over, who whispered to me to be patient, who brought casseroles when things were hard. But she was not trembling. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were clear, and in them, I saw a mixture of deep, ancient sorrow and a terrifying resolve. I thought, in that moment, that she was just protecting me from a bad morning. I thought she was just a tired aunt who had reached her limit with a rude sister-in-law. I thought she was stepping in to de-escalate a family squabble. I was wrong. I did not know that Thanksgiving morning, Aunt Margot had already chosen the date and time of execution for an entire empire bearing the Carmichael name. That word, enough, hung in the air of the kitchen, heavier and more potent than the smell of the 20-pound turkey roasting in the oven. It was a word I had never heard in that house. We were a family built on more debt, more denial, more polite silence. Margot's single word was a crack in the foundation, and as I stood there, the sting on my cheek radiating heat, the past came flooding back in, not as a memory, but as a blueprint for the present. My mother, Hannah, died when I was 13. It was sudden, an aneurysm that stole her from us on a Tuesday morning in April, and in doing so, stole the entire soul of our family. My mother was not just the heart of our home. She was the heart of Silverbrook. She was the one who knew how to make the lakeside lodges feel like a piece of history, not just a row of cabins. Carmichael Lakeside Retreats had been her dream, her third child, as she called it. My father, Daniel, had the business sense, but Hannah had the vision. She was the one who designed the rustic yet elegant interiors, who remembered every returning guest's name, who planted the sprawling hydrangea bushes that made the main lodge famous. The resort was the pride of our town, a place that provided half the summer jobs for the local kids and drew tourists from 3 states away. When she died, the color drained out of everything. My father's grief was a bottomless, empty thing. He walked through the lodge like a ghost, signing checks and approving menus without seeing them. The business, which had been his and Hannah's shared passion, became a heavy, joyless anchor. He was lost. And then, just 2 years later, 2 years, a period the town still whispered about at the local diner, he found Lydia. Lydia did not arrive in Silverbrook. She descended. She had been a consultant from a firm in Chicago, supposedly hired to optimize operational flow during a difficult transition. She was sleek, polished, and had an answer for everything. At first, she was a miracle. She was gentle with me, in a distant, clinical way. She organized my father's schedule. She spoke in soothing, corporate tones about moving forward and honoring Hannah's legacy by ensuring its profitability. My father, desperate for a lifeline, clung to her. He mistook her efficiency for strength, her ambition for affection. The wedding was a quiet, tasteful affair at the resort, which Lydia had already begun to update. The hydrangeas were torn out and replaced with minimalist, severe-looking ornamental grasses. The warm, pine-paneled lobby was painted a stark, fashionable gray. As I grew, so did Lydia's control. It was a slow, creeping occupation. First, she took over the finances, just to ease Daniel's burden. Then she took over the narrative. I was 15 when I first overheard her telling a group of visiting investors at a cocktail party how she had found the resort on the brink of bankruptcy, how she had single-handedly saved it from my father's grief-stricken mismanagement. When one of the investors, a man who had known my family for years, said, "I remember Hannah put her heart into this place," Lydia had smiled, a tight, thin-lipped expression of pity. "Yes, Hannah was very creative," she'd said, the word creative sounding like irresponsible. "But she wasn't a businesswoman. Daniel is lucky we managed to right the ship before her sentimental project sank the whole enterprise." My mother was erased. She was reduced to a footnote, a liability, a sentimental project, and I, her daughter, became a living, breathing, inconvenient reminder of that project. Lydia was never cruel to me in the way people imagine. There were no locked closets or withheld meals. The abuse was more sophisticated, more insidious. It was the public humiliation of a teenager, and then the constant undermining of an adult. It was the gaslighting, the manipulation of memory, the slow, systematic erosion of my worth in my father's eyes. When I was 16 and aced my economics final, I proudly told my father at the dinner table, Lydia, without looking up from her salad, remarked, "Well, let's hope it sticks. It's easy to memorize a book. Kaylee, it's much harder to have actual business instincts. Some people just don't have it." When I got a full scholarship to college for finance, she told the neighbors it was so fortunate I'd gotten aid because the resort was tightening its belt and couldn't be expected to fund experimental career paths. I swore to myself, sitting in my sterile, gray-painted childhood bedroom, that I would never, ever depend on the Carmichael family for a single dollar. I would be so successful, so independent, that they could never touch me. And I did it. I graduated at the top of my class. I moved to Minneapolis and clawed my way into a highly competitive analyst program. I landed at Clearline Orbit Analytics, a rising star in the fintech world. I lived in my own apartment. I paid my own bills. I built a life that was mine, a fortress of solitude and security, built on the very numbers Lydia pretended not to understand. The only person who understood my exile was Margot, my mother's sister. While the rest of the family either fell in line with Lydia or drifted away, Margot stayed, a quiet, watchful presence. She ran a small bakery in town and was, by all appearances, a simple woman, but she was the only one who saw me. When I was in high school, she would call me every Wednesday. "Kaylee, I'm trying out a new recipe for apple pie, and I need a taster. Can you come by after school?" Or when I was in college. "I'm having trouble with my new spreadsheet for inventory. Since you're the finance expert, could you take a look?" I would go to her small, warm house, which always smelled of yeast and sugar. We would never talk about Lydia. We would never talk about my father. We would just work. She would give me a place to breathe, a quiet corner of the world where I was not Hannah's sentimental daughter or Lydia's ungrateful stepchild. I was just Kaylee. But even with my independence, my father always found a way to pull me back in. The calls would start with guilt. "Kaylee, honey, it's your dad. I know you're busy with your important job, but we're just simple country folk down here." And then would come the request. "Lydia's got these numbers from the accountant, and she's just worried sick. Could you just glance at them? For me? You're so smart with this stuff. It would really put your stepmother's mind at ease." And like a fool, I would do it, because he was still my dad, because a part of me still believed that if I could just show him the numbers, if I could just prove my value, he would finally see me. He would finally choose me. I would sit at my sleek desk at Clearline, running projections on multi-million-dollar portfolios, and then I would open the file from the resort. The files were always a mess. The bookkeeping was creative, to say the least. I would find bad debt being carried as an asset, loans being refinanced at predatory rates, expenses for consulting that led to shell companies I couldn't trace. 3 years ago, I found a major discrepancy. A loan for a new boat dock that was $500,000 more than the highest contractor's bid. I built a presentation. I drove home for the weekend. I sat in the lodge's conference room, the one my mother had designed, and laid it all out. My father looked confused, rubbing his temples. "I don't understand. Kaylee, it's just a loan. The bank approved it." Lydia, however, was perfectly calm. She sat at the head of the table, tapping a pen. When I finished, she smiled at me. It was not a nice smile. "Kaylee, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You always did love to make things more complicated than they are. You're just trying to show off, to make yourself seem smart. You're just like your mother, always getting lost in the weeds. Why don't you leave the real business to the grown-ups?" I drove back to Minneapolis that night in a silent rage. I did not cry. I just got angry, and I got careful. I stopped trying to help. I started to observe. I remembered something Margot had said to me after that meeting. I had gone to her bakery, furious and humiliated, and told her what happened. I told her I was done, that I would never look at their books again. Margot was kneading bread, her strong hands folding the dough over and over. She listened patiently. When I finished my tirade, she dusted the flour off her hands and looked at me, her eyes clear and serious. "Don't ever stop looking at the numbers. Kaylee," she'd said, her voice low. "Lydia thinks they're just ink on paper. Your father thinks they're a headache. But you know what they are? They're a story. They're the truth. One day, those numbers you cling to will be the only weapon you need." And as I stood in the kitchen on Thanksgiving morning, the red print of Lydia's hand on my face, Margot's word enough still vibrating in the air, I realized that day had finally come. Margot's enough was the end. But the beginning of that end had happened 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. The slap was just the clumsy, violent conclusion to a game Lydia had already been playing, a game she was confident she had already won. The summons had come via text message, which was Lydia's preferred method of communication, impersonal and non-negotiable. "Kaylee, I need you at the lodge this Saturday, 10 a.m. We are restructuring some debt and your father needs your input." Needs your input was code. It meant I was being called, not to advise, but to consent. I drove up from Minneapolis, the 2-hour trip feeling heavier than usual. The trees along the highway had shed their autumn colors and were now just a tangle of black, skeletal branches against a gray sky. Silverbrook was beautiful in the summer, but in late fall, it just looked cold and exposed. I did not go to the main house. I went straight to the Carmichael Lodge. The parking lot was mostly empty, the tourist season long over. I found Lydia in the small conference room off the lobby, the one my mother used to use for her garden club meetings. Lydia had, of course, redecorated it. The warm oak table was gone, replaced by a slab of black laminate. The walls were the same flat, lifeless gray as our house. She was alone, a stack of bound documents in front of her. She wore a sharp navy blue blazer and smiled at me as I entered, a gesture completely devoid of warmth. "Kaylee, thank you for coming," she said, as if I'd had a choice. "Coffee?" "No, thank you. What's this about?" "Straight to business. I like that." She pushed the thickest document across the table. "Good news. We're finally moving forward on the full renovation of the West cabins and the new spa. We've secured financing. We're just recategorizing some of the existing debt to make the books cleaner for the new investors." I opened the file. My eyes automatically skipped the preamble and went straight to the numbers. The cover sheet was a proposal for refinancing. I turned the page, and then another, and then I stopped. My name was on the third page, not as a witness, not as an advisor. It was on a personal guarantee. "Lydia," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "why is my name on a guarantor agreement?" "Ah, you found it. Good eye." She waved her hand dismissively, as if it were a typo. "It's just a formality. Really, the bank is being archaic. They see the resort's seasonal income, and they get nervous. They just want to see a secondary income stream as a backup. Someone with a stable, consistent salary." "Someone like me," I said. It was not a question. "Exactly. It's just a signature. Kaylee, you don't lose anything." I read the number. My blood ran cold. Colder than the lake outside. "Lydia, this is for $4.5 million. "Yes, it's a significant project," she said, her eyes bright and hard. "This isn't a formality." I flipped the page, my fingers tracing the fine print. The clauses were predatory. They were not just tying this note to my W-2 income, they were tying it to all personal assets, bank accounts, investment portfolios, and, my breath caught, and any and all inherited shares or trust holdings. She was going after the emergency shares my mother, Hannah, had left me, the shares that were supposed to be my last-ditch safety net. This document would not just make me liable. It would gut my entire life. It would wipe out my career, my home in Minneapolis, and the last physical piece of my mother I had left. Her smile tightened. The mask of the competent businesswoman slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "Kaylee, don't be selfish. This is about your father. This is about the future of this entire family. Do you know the stress he is under? This project is the only thing that will save this resort. If you love your father, you will sign. It's just a signature to show you support him. If you love your father," the old, rusty guilt trap. It was the same one she had used to get me to give up my weekends, to check the messy books, to stay silent at dinner parties when she took credit for my mother's work. My love for my father has nothing to do with me personally guaranteeing a $4.5 million loan for a spa he doesn't even want. "He does want it," she snapped. "He just doesn't have the strength to fight for it. I do." I started to close the folder, my decision made. But as I did, my eyes caught something on an ancillary document underneath the main agreement. It was a preliminary filing, an intent to restructure, and at the bottom, there was a signature line. "Kaylee Walker." I stared at it. The looping K, the sharp W. It was a good attempt, but it was not mine. My K was softer. My R didn't trail off like that. I looked up at her, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Lydia, what is this?" She did not flinch. "I told you, it's the preliminary filing. We needed to submit it last week to lock in the rate." "You already submitted a document with my signature on it." "It was just a placeholder," she said coolly. "A statement of intent. This," she tapped the main guarantee, "is the final one. This is the one that matters." I felt a strange, cold detachment settle over me. The shock was being replaced by the familiar, analytical calm I used at work when a system had been breached. This was no longer a family dispute. This was fraud. I took a slow breath. I could not storm out. I could not accuse her. Not yet. She had the documents. I had nothing. I pretended to reread the main guarantee, my mind racing. I needed copies. I needed proof. "You're right," I said finally, my voice sounding hollow and strange to my own ears. "It's a lot to take in. $4.5 million. That's significant. Her smile returned. She thought she had me. It's a new era for us, Kaylee. I can't just sign it here, I said, tapping the folder. I have to run this past my own financial advisor. For my mortgage. They need to know about any new liabilities. It was a plausible lie. Lydia's eyes narrowed. She did not like that. Why? It's a family matter. It's my credit score. Lydia, it's procedural. I'll get it back to you. I stood up, but I did not take the folder. I knew she would never let it leave the room. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I'll just take pictures of the signature pages, so my advisor can see what we're dealing with. Before she could object, I had flipped open the file and was snapping photos. Not just of the signature pages. I photographed every single page, the fine print, the LLC names, the interest rates, and most importantly, the forged signature on the preliminary filing. Kaylee, that's not necessary. All done, I said, putting my phone back in my pocket. The digital files were already uploading to my secure cloud. I'll let you know. I have to get back to the city. I walked out of that conference room and did not look back. The drive to Minneapolis was a blur. I did not cry. I did not rage. I just drove, my mind working like the analysis engine at my firm. I spent all of Sunday in my apartment, not at my desk, but at my kitchen table. I forwarded the images from my phone to my work email under the subject line, Hypothetical Case Study Q4. On Monday, I went to the office early. I told my team I was working on a personal project, a favor for a friend's family business that was in a bit of a mess. I had two of my most trusted junior analysts, both brilliant and discreet, help me run the numbers. I redacted the names. I called it Project Lakeside. Kaylee, this is a mess. My analyst, Ben, said, peering at his screen, this debt structure is insane. It's not designed to be paid off. It's designed to be rolled over, indefinitely, while leveraging more and more assets. What assets? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Well, that's the weird part. The main company seems to be cross-collateralizing with, let's see, two other entities, a Silverbrook Horizons LLC and a Lakeview Crest Holdings. Never heard of them. But look, the loans from Entity A are being used to pay the interest on loans from Entity B, which is then securing more debt for Entity C. It's a shell game. My blood turned to ice. Silverbrook Horizons. That was the name on the guarantee Lydia tried to make me sign. Ben, I said, can you find out who owns those LLCs? Give me an hour. While he worked, I did my own digging. I logged into a restricted database we used for corporate verification. I typed in my own name, Kaylee Walker. And there it was. My digital signature. Not a handwritten forgery, but a legal, binding, electronic authorization. It had been used to file tax documents for the resort for the past 2 years. Invoices for consulting fees I had never seen. Contracts with vendors I had never heard of. All filed under my name, using my credentials, which Lydia must have stolen from my father's computer. I felt like I could not breathe. This was not just a plan to trap me in the future. She had been using me as a financial shield, as she'd called it, for years. She had been committing tax fraud and wire fraud, and she had put my name on all of it. If the IRS ever audited the resort, it would not be Lydia or my father who went to jail. It would be me. Ben knocked on my office door frame. Got it. Those LLCs? Silverbrook Horizons and Lakeview Crest? They're not owned by a corporation. They're registered to a private residential address in Silverbrook. He read the address. It was Lydia's, or rather, it was the address of the high-end condo she had purchased as an investment 3 years prior, the one my father thought was just a rental property. I sat there, in my glass-walled office, surrounded by the hum of servers and the quiet typing of my team, and I finally understood. This was not about a spa. This was not about saving the resort. This was about siphoning its assets, loading it with fraudulent debt under my name, and then, when the whole thing collapsed, Lydia would walk away clean, living in her paid-off condo, while my father and I were left holding the bag. I did not break down. I did not get angry. I got methodical. I opened a new, encrypted drive on my personal laptop. I created a folder. I named it November Truth. I downloaded every file. I cross-referenced every date. I saved the forged signatures next to my real one. I saved the LLC registrations. I saved the tax filings. I built my case, number by number, fact by fact. Margot was right. The numbers were a story, and this story was a horror show. I finished at 3 a.m. I closed the laptop. The Thanksgiving invitation was taped to my refrigerator. I knew then that I could not just not go. I could not just send an email. This had to be done in person. I had to confront her. I had to confront my father. I was going to Thanksgiving, and I was bringing my weapon. I just did not know that Lydia, having failed to get my signature, was already moving to her next play. She was not just planning a Thanksgiving dinner, she was planning an ambush, and that blue folder she'd slapped on the counter that morning? That was just the opening shot. The diner was called the Rusty Spoon, a faded chrome and neon relic sitting off the side of County Road 9 like a forgotten memory. It was the kind of place that smelled permanently of burnt coffee and bacon grease, a scent that used to comfort me when I was 16 and hiding from the suffocating perfection of my stepmother's renovations. Margot and I had spent countless hours in the back booth, nursing mugs of hot chocolate and sharing a single slice of Dutch apple pie. It was our sanctuary, a neutral ground where the Carmichael drama could not reach us. I pulled into the gravel lot 3 days before Thanksgiving. The sky was a bruising shade of purple, threatening snow, which felt appropriate for what I was about to do. I grabbed my laptop bag, heavy with the printed evidence from my November Truth folder, and headed inside. Margot was already there, sitting in our usual booth in the far corner. She was nursing a black coffee, staring out the window at the passing logging trucks. When she saw me, she did not smile. She just nodded, her face grave. She knew this was not a social call. I slid into the booth opposite her. I did not even take off my coat. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the stack of papers I had organized the night before. I laid them out on the cracked vinyl table, pushing aside the sugar dispenser and the ketchup bottle. "Look at this," I said, my voice low. I walked her through it, page by page. I showed her the loan guarantee for $4.5 million. I showed her the preliminary filing with the forged signature. I showed her the tax documents from the last 2 years, the ones filed electronically using my identity, authorizing deductions for businesses I had never heard of. I showed her the network of LLCs, Silverbrook Horizons, Lakeview Crest, that all traced back to a P.O. box in a neighboring town, a box that I had confirmed was registered to Lydia's maiden name. I expected Margot to gasp. I expected her to be shocked that her brother's wife was committing felony fraud against her own stepdaughter. Margot did none of those things. She simply put on her reading glasses, the ones with the taped bridge, and looked at the documents in silence. She traced the lines of the forged signature with a calloused finger. She looked at the routing numbers. She looked at the dates. Then, she took a deep breath, took off her glasses, and reached into her oversized canvas tote bag. "I thought you should know," I said, feeling a sudden spike of defensiveness at her lack of reaction. "She is stealing from the company, Margot, and she is framing me for it." "I know," Margot said softly. She pulled out a book. It was not a laptop or a tablet. It was an old leather-bound ledger, the kind you buy at a stationery store for $5. The cover was worn soft, the corners bent. She placed it on the table next to my high-definition laser prints. "Open it," she said. I opened the book. The pages were filled with handwriting. Neat, meticulous columns of numbers written in blue ink. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Margot's. I looked at the dates. They went back 15 years. They started when my mother, Hannah, was still alive. "You kept books?" I asked. Margot nodded. "I was the bookkeeper. Kaylee, for the first 6 years, your mother hated the numbers. She just wanted to grow the flowers and design the rooms. So I did the math. I knew every penny that came in and every penny that went out. We were profitable, Not wealthy, but solid. We had a reserve. We had a plan. She turned the pages, flipping past the years of steady growth, past the year my mother died, and stopped at a page dated 2 years after the funeral. The ink color changed from blue to black. The handwriting became jagged, rushed. This was when she came. Margot said, "Lydia." I looked at the columns. Suddenly, the expenses spiked. She told Daniel that my methods were archaic. Margot continued, her voice devoid of bitterness but heavy with resignation. She said a modern resort needed modern accounting. She brought in a firm from Chicago, said they were professionals, said family shouldn't mix with finance. Daniel believed her. He always believes her. She fired me from the books a month before the wedding. "But you kept writing," I said, looking at the entries that continued even after her dismissal. I kept writing down what I saw. Margot said, "I worked the front desk sometimes. I worked in the kitchen. I saw the invoices come in. I saw the delivery trucks. And I saw the things that didn't add up." She pointed to a line item from 10 years ago. Consulting fee, Northern Strategy Group, $12,000. I looked at my own stack of papers. I found a recent invoice. Strategy consultation, Silverbrook Horizons, $15,000. "It is the same thing," Margot said. "Just a different name. She's been bleeding the resort dry for a decade. Kaylee. Just small enough amounts that Daniel wouldn't panic, but large enough to fund her lifestyle. The clothes, the car, the condo, it all came from the maintenance budget, the staff bonuses, the emergency fund. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. This was not just about money. This was about the slow, deliberate dismantling of my mother's legacy. I started cross-referencing Margot's old data with my new findings. The pattern was undeniable. A roof repair that cost $30,000 in Margot's ledger was listed as $80,000 in the official tax filing I had downloaded. The contractor listed in my filing was a company called Lakeside Solutions. I typed the name into my laptop, which was tethered to my phone's hotspot. Lakeside Solutions, no website, no reviews. I ran the tax ID. It matched the tax ID for the contractor in Margot's book. A local guy named Miller, who I knew for a fact had retired 5 years ago. Lydia was using a dead company's credentials to funnel money into her own shell accounts. "This is it," I whispered. "This is the smoking gun. We can prove she's been embezzling since the beginning. We can go to the police." Margot shook her head slowly. "Not yet. If we go to the police now, she will spin it. She will say it was Daniel's idea. She will say she was just following orders. She will drag your father down with her, and he is too weak to defend himself. She has had years to cover her tracks. Kaylee, she likely has a paper trail that blames him for everything." "Then what do we do?" I asked, slamming my hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "She is trying to pin $4 million of debt on me. Margot, I can't just sit here and watch." Margot reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was rough, dry from years of flour and dish soap, but her grip was iron strong. "There is something else," she said. "Something your mother did." I froze. My mother? Margot looked around the diner, checking to make sure the waitress was out of earshot. Then she leaned in closer. 2 weeks before Hannah died, she came to see me. She had been having headaches, bad ones. I think she knew something was wrong. Even if the doctors hadn't found the aneurysm yet, she was worried about Daniel. She loved him, but she knew he was pliable. She knew he needed a strong hand to guide him, and she was terrified of whose hand that might be if she wasn't there. I listened, my throat tight. "She went to see Arthur Keene," Margot said. "Arthur Keene? The ancient lawyer who had an office above the pharmacy?" I remembered him as a man who smelled of pipe tobacco and dust, giving me peppermint candies when I was 5. "Yes, she set up a trust. Kaylee, a blind trust. She took her 30% personal ownership of the land and the buildings, the part she inherited from your grandfather, and she locked it away." I frowned. "But Dad says he owns everything. Lydia acts like she owns everything." "They think they do," Margot said, a glint of satisfaction appearing in her eyes. Hannah left the operating rights to Daniel. He can run the business. He can keep the profits. But the equity? The actual dirt and bricks of that 30%? It belongs to a trust, and the beneficiary of that trust is you. I sat back, stunned. I own 30% of the resort? Technically, the trust owns it, and you are the sole beneficiary. But there is a catch. Hannah was smart. She didn't want you to have it when you were too young. She didn't want you to sell it for sports cars. And she didn't want a stepmother to get her hands on it. Margot took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving mine. The trust is dormant. Kaylee, it only activates under specific conditions. Hannah wrote the clause herself. It says the trust assets are to be transferred to your full control only if the executor, Arthur Keene, is presented with irrefutable proof that the other shareholders, meaning your father or his spouse, are acting in a way that causes gross financial peril or malicious liability to the beneficiary. I looked down at the papers spread across the table, the forged signature, the guarantee that would bankrupt me, the tax fraud carried out in my name. Malicious liability, I repeated. Margot nodded. Hannah told me. When she is old enough to understand, and only if you see that she is being pushed into the fire, you take her to Arthur. She paused, looking at the bruise that was barely visible under my makeup, the remnant of the stress I had been carrying for weeks. She looked at the fear and the anger in my eyes. I have watched for 15 years. Kaylee, I watched Lydia push you out of your room. I watched her push you out of the family photos. I watched her push you out of your father's life. I stayed quiet because I thought you were safe as long as you were away in Minneapolis. I thought if you had your own life, she couldn't hurt you. She pushed the stack of papers back toward me. But this isn't just pushing you away. This is trying to destroy you to save herself. Margot stood up. She picked up her old ledger and clutched it to her chest like a shield. She looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw the aunt who had protected me when I was a child, the woman who had been the silent guardian of my mother's memory. I think this Thanksgiving, she said, her voice steady and hard, you have been pushed deep enough into the fire. I gathered the papers. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from adrenaline. The pieces were falling into place. I wasn't just a victim of fraud. I was a sleeping partner with the power to pull the plug on the entire operation. I will call Arthur. I said, No, Margot said. Arthur is expecting us. I called him this morning. But he is old. Kaylee, he follows the letter of the law. He needs the original documents. He needs the confession. He needs something that proves, without a doubt, that Lydia is doing this with malicious intent, not just incompetence. The data is good. The ledger is good. But to trigger the trust immediately, to stop her before Monday, we need to catch her in the act. I looked at the recorder app on my phone. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner that was approaching, the dinner where Lydia planned to announce the new era of the resort. She is going to try to make me sign again on Thursday, isn't she? I asked. Margot nodded. She is desperate. The bank deadline is Monday. She will try to corner you. She will use the family. She will use the holiday. She will use your father. Let her try, I said. We paid the bill and walked out into the cold, gray afternoon. The wind was picking up, biting at our faces. You go to Arthur on Friday morning, Margot said as we reached my car. Bring everything. I will meet you there. But Thursday you have to be strong. You have to go into that house and let her think she has the upper hand. You have to let her show her true face. I looked at my aunt. She looked small in her winter coat, but her eyes were burning. I can do it, I said. I know, Margot replied. She opened her car door, then paused. Kaylee, when you see your father, don't expect him to save you. He made his choice a long time ago. Thursday isn't about saving him. It's about saving yourself. I watched her drive away, her taillights fading into the gloom. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, staring at the file on the passenger seat. The Thanksgiving turkey was thawing in the fridge at the main house. The table was probably already being set with the good china. Lydia was likely selecting the wine, thinking about how she would toast to her success, to her cleverness, to the stupid stepdaughter who would sign her life away for a crumb of affection. She did not know about the diner. She did not know about the ledger. And she certainly did not know about Arthur Keene. I started the engine. I was going to go to Thanksgiving. I was going to eat the turkey. I was going to smile at the relatives. And then, when the moment was right, I was going to burn it all down. But first, I had one more stop to make before Thursday. I needed to make sure that when I walked into that kitchen, I wasn't just armed with paper. I needed to be armed with a plan that would leave Lydia no room to maneuver. The enough that Margot would say in the kitchen was not just a reaction, it was going to be the signal. I put the car in gear and drove toward town. The investigation was over. The war was about to begin. The email arrived on Tuesday morning. 2 days before Thanksgiving, it was sent to the entire extended family and several local business contacts. The subject line was aggressively cheerful. A big announcement and a new era for Carmichael Lakeside Retreats. Lydia had, of course, punctuated it with a string of champagne bottle and firework emojis, a digital celebration of a victory she already considered won. The body of the email was brief and smug. Daniel and I are so excited to share some wonderful news about the future of the resort. We will be making a special announcement during our Thanksgiving toast. We cannot wait to celebrate this new chapter with all of you. I read it at my desk at Clearline, a cup of cold coffee in my hand. It was not an invitation. It was a summons to a public execution. My execution. She was going to announce the new spa, the new financing, and by extension, she was going to announce that I was the one who had secured it. She was going to trap me in front of everyone, making it impossible for me to object without looking like a petty, jealous child. I forwarded the email to my encrypted folder. Then I packed my bag. I returned to Silverbrook on Wednesday afternoon, not as a daughter coming home for the holiday, but as an auditor arriving for a forensic investigation. My duffel bag contained one pair of jeans, a sweater, and my laptop, my briefcase, however, held the real essentials. A 2-inch thick binder labeled November Truth, containing every printed email, every forged document, and every LLC registration I had found, and in a small, zippered pocket was a black USB drive, a tiny, insignificant piece of plastic that held the entire, ugly truth. When I walked into the house, the atmosphere was already thick with forced festivity. The living room, which my mother had designed with warm woods and deep, comfortable sofas, was now a sterile showroom of gray and beige. Lydia was holding court, sipping a glass of white wine while relatives I saw only once a year gathered around her. And standing next to her, looking every bit the heir apparent, was Trent. Trent was Lydia's son from her first marriage. He was 30 years old, with the lazy good looks of someone who had never worked a day he did not have to. He had spent his 20s finding himself on Lydia's dime and had recently returned to Silverbrook to take on a vague management role at the resort. He wore a blazer over a t-shirt, a look designed to seem casual but which just looked expensive. "Kaylee, you made it," Lydia chirped, her smile as wide and fake as a show home. She did not get up. Trent was just telling everyone about the new marketing initiatives he's designed for the spa. "It's all about synergy, really," Trent said, addressing the room as if he were giving a TED Talk. "We're not just selling rooms, we're selling an experience. We're targeting a high net worth demographic that Silverbrook has frankly been ignoring." My uncle nodded, impressed. My father, standing by the fireplace, just stared into the flames. He looked exhausted. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt that I recognized as one of my mother's old gardening shirts, and he looked entirely out of place in his own home. He glanced at me when I entered, a quick, haunted look, before his eyes darted back to the fire. He was already a ghost, and Lydia was just waiting for him to fade completely. I needed to try, one last time. I needed to know, for my own sanity, that I had given him the choice. I put my bags down by the stairs. "Dad, can I talk to you for a second?" He flinched, as if I had asked him to lift something heavy. Oh, Kaylee, I'm just helping Lydia get things ready. It will only take a minute, on the porch. He followed me reluctantly, pulling his thin shirt around him as the cold air hit. The porch overlooked the lake, which was already beginning to freeze over. A vast sheet of dark, dull ice. "What is it?" he asked, not looking at me. "I need to ask you about the loan," I said, keeping my voice level. "The $4.5 million guarantee that Lydia wanted me to sign. Did you know about it?" He shuffled his feet. "Kaylee, we talked about this. It's just a banking formality. You know how they are. They need papers for everything." "Dad, it's not a formality. It's a personal guarantee that ties my entire financial future to the resort. It gives them the right to take my salary, my house, and Mom's trust shares if the resort defaults." He winced at the mention of my mother. Don't be so dramatic. The resort is not going to default. This spa is going to turn everything around. Lydia has run the projections. We're going to be more profitable than ever." "She ran the projections?" I asked, my voice hardening. "Or did she just move the debt around? Do you know about Silverbrook Horizons, Dad? Do you know about Lakeview Crest? Do you know she's been filing taxes using my name?" He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. "Stop it. Just stop it. Kaylee, your stepmother has worked tirelessly for this family, for this resort. While you've been off in the city playing with your spreadsheets, she is saving your mother's legacy. And all you can do is come here and attack her. Try to undermine her." "I'm not attacking her," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "I'm trying to protect you. I'm trying to protect myself. She is committing fraud, Dad, and she is using me as her shield." "That's enough," he snapped, his voice cracking. "I will not have you speak about my wife that way. She is under an incredible amount of stress. We all are, and we need this. We need this to work. So for once in your life, can you please just be part of this family and help? It's just a signature." It was a wall of glass. I could see him on the other side, but I could not reach him. He had made his choice. He had chosen the comforting lie over the terrifying, complicated truth. He had chosen Lydia. "It's not just a signature, Dad," I said quietly, the cold seeping into my bones. "And I'm not signing it." I turned and went back inside, leaving him alone on the porch. As I was walking toward the stairs, Trent stepped in front of me, blocking my path. He had a proprietary air, as if he now owned the hallway. "Hey, Kaylee," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes were sharp. "I overheard you with your dad. You're really giving him a hard time. You know, he's doing his best." "This doesn't concern you, Trent." He laughed, a short, arrogant bark. "See? That's where you're wrong. It does concern me. I'm the one who's going to be running this place. I'm the one who's actually committed to the family legacy. Mom is just trying to secure our future. By forging my signature and trying to chain me to millions in debt?" He didn't even blink. "You're a financial analyst. You should understand this. It's just leveraging. The bank needs a guarantee. You're the one with the steady W-2. It's a team effort. You should be flattered she's including you." I stared at him. He was in on it. He was not just an arrogant fool. He was a co-conspirator. The realization settled in my stomach like lead. "You really should stick to your job in the city, Kaylee," he continued, leaning in slightly. "You're good at that, apparently. But leave the real business to us. The whole town knows who's been here all along, and who just shows up to criticize. Don't ruin Thanksgiving for everyone by making this a problem." I finally understood. This was the narrative Lydia had been building for years. I was the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned the family for the big city. Trent was the loyal son who had returned to save the legacy. My refusal to sign the papers would not be seen as a smart financial decision. It would be painted as the ultimate betrayal. She had already poisoned the well. I said nothing. I just sidestepped him and went up to my old room. In the kitchen, I could see Margot through the doorway. She was peeling potatoes, her back to the living room circus. She had arrived just before me, and as I passed, Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. She had heard it. She had heard Trent. She had seen my father. Her gaze was steady, and it said only one thing: stay the course. I spent the rest of the evening in my room, the one that was still painted a pale, childish pink, with my high school track and field ribbons still thumbtacked to a corkboard. Lydia had preserved it this way on purpose. A museum of my adolescence, a place where I could never be an adult. I sat on the bed, my laptop open. My November Truth folder was open. But I was not just reviewing the data. I was converting it. I was taking the spreadsheets, the forged signatures, the LLC flowcharts, and I was putting them into a simple, clean, and utterly devastating PowerPoint presentation. A presentation designed not for analysts, but for a room full of relatives, investors, and small-town gossips. It was late, probably after midnight. The house was finally quiet. I needed a glass of water. I crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the thick carpet. As I passed the study, my father's old office, I heard voices. Lydia and Trent. They were speaking in low, urgent whispers. The bank confirmed the transfer this afternoon. Lydia was saying, "The wire went through." "So it's done?" Trent asked. Even if she makes a fuss tomorrow?" "It doesn't matter if she makes a fuss," Lydia replied, and I could hear the triumph in her voice. The preliminary guarantee was enough, the one her signature was on from last week. The bank accepted it as binding to lock the rate. The money is in the account, as of tomorrow night. When I make the announcement, the first checks to the contractors will be cut. It will be irreversible. She'll be so deep in it. She won't have a choice but to play along. Her credit will be tied to ours, whether she likes it or not. My heart stopped. It was not a plan anymore. The bomb was not ticking. It had already gone off. The forged signature I had seen in her office 3 weeks ago, the one she'd called a placeholder, had been used. The $4.5 million was already borrowed. In my name. I backed away, retreating into the shadows of the hallway. I felt the cold sweat on my neck. I was not coming here to prevent a crime. I was coming to a crime scene, and I was the primary victim. I walked back to my room, my legs shaking. I did not get water. I sat down at my laptop. The house was silent, but in my ears, there was a deafening roar. Lydia was not going to ask me to sign anything tomorrow. She did not need to. The slap in the kitchen, the blue folder, that was all just a performance. It was a test, a way to see how I would react. But the real trap was already sprung. I looked at the PowerPoint file on my screen. It was titled, November Truth, PTX. I plugged the small, black USB drive into the side of my laptop. The drive's icon appeared on my desktop. My hand was perfectly steady. My resolve was no longer just about justice. It was about survival. I clicked the file and dragged it onto the USB icon. The progress bar filled in a fraction of a second. Copying. Complete. I ejected the drive and held it in my palm. Lydia was planning a toast. She was planning to celebrate her victory. She had no idea that I was planning a presentation, and I was going to give it to her, and to everyone else, right in the middle of her perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving morning. The kitchen was exactly as I had left it, steeped in the false warmth of cinnamon, roasting poultry, and the distant roar of a television crowd. I was standing at the island, my hands deliberately coated in flour, playing the role of the dutiful daughter one last time. I was a prop in Lydia's play, and I was waiting for my cue. Margot was at the sink, washing potatoes. A few cousins were milling about, stealing bacon from a plate, creating the perfect audience of casual witnesses. Lydia made her entrance at precisely 10:30 a.m., just as I knew she would. She swept in, wearing her cream-colored cashmere, holding a new, thinner blue folder. She seemed energized, her eyes bright with the thrill of her secret victory. She was not just a host. She was a conqueror presiding over the spoils. She walked directly to me, completely ignoring Margot. She placed the folder on the flour-dusted counter. "Kaylee, dear," she said, her voice loud enough for the others to hear her magnanimous, patient tone. "I know you were confused by the large packet before. This is just a simple update. A small addendum the bank needs for their files before the holiday. It just clarifies a few terms. It won't take a second." I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I looked up and met her gaze. "No," I said. The smile on her face didn't falter, but her eyes went cold. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice clear and steady. "I will not be signing that folder. Not today. Not ever." A cousin who had been reaching for a pickle stopped, his hand hovering. The kitchen chatter died. Lydia's voice dropped to a hiss. "Do not start this again, Kaylee. This is not a request. This is a minor administrative task. You are being childish." "No, I'm being smart," I said, wiping my floured hands on my apron. "I know you don't need my signature. Lydia, I know you already used the forged placeholder from 3 weeks ago. I know you already accepted the $4.5 million wire transfer in my name." Her face went pale. It was not the rosy, indignant blush I expected. It was a sickly white shock. She had not, in her wildest dreams, imagined I knew. "I know," I continued, pressing my advantage, "that you've been running a shell game with Silverbrook Horizons and Lakeview Crest for years. I know you've been committing tax fraud using my digital signature. I know this isn't about a spa. It's about you siphoning money to your private accounts. You're not asking for my signature. Lydia, you're asking me to be an accomplice to your crimes after the fact, and the answer is no." For a second, she was completely still, her mind visibly racing, trying to calculate this new, impossible variable. She had been challenged. She had been exposed. And worse, she had been exposed in front of the family, the relatives she worked so hard to impress, the ones who saw her as the resort's sophisticated savior. Her entire narrative was crumbling. Her rage was not about the loan anymore. It was about the loss of control. "You ungrateful little bitch," she whispered, her face contorting. And then she slapped me. It was a hard, open-palmed strike that cracked through the silence of the kitchen. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying across my face. The sting was electric, sharp and humiliating. It was the sound of a private war suddenly going public, an explosion that ripped the polite veneer off our family and exposed the rot underneath. I tasted blood, a metallic tang where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. I straightened up slowly, my cheek burning, and looked at her. The relatives were frozen, staring, their mouths open. Margot had gone still at the sink, her hands submerged in the potato water. Lydia was breathing hard, her chest heaving, the mask of the perfect hostess shattered, replaced by the ugly, desperate face of a cornered animal. It was in that precise moment of frozen, ugly silence that my father, Daniel Carmichael, walked in. He was holding his morning glass of scotch. He looked at me, my hand now pressed to my bright red cheek. He looked at Lydia, who was vibrating with fury. He looked at the silent, staring audience. "What is going on in here?" he demanded, his voice weak and weary before the fight even began. "Your daughter," Lydia spat, recovering herself, turning on the victimhood instantly. "She is trying to ruin Thanksgiving. She is making wild, insane accusations. I have been working myself to the bone for this family, and she stands here and slanders me." My father turned his disappointed, tired eyes on me. "Kaylee, what did you do? What did you say to her?" "She hit me," I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. "She hit me because I told her I know she forged my name on a $4.5 million loan." "Oh, for God's sake," my father groaned, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Are we back to this? Kaylee, please. It is Thanksgiving. It is 9 a.m. Can you not be dramatic? Lydia is under a lot of pressure. The bank, the spa. Just apologize to your mother so we can have one peaceful day." The words hung in the air. Apologize to your mother. I looked at him. My father. the man who was supposed to protect me, choosing, finally and irrevocably, the lie. He was ordering me to apologize for being assaulted, for having my identity stolen. He was ordering me to swallow the poison to keep his holiday peaceful. I felt the tears well, hot and angry, but I did not let them fall. I stood up to my full height. I will not apologize to the person who forged my signature to steal money. Dad, I said, my voice as cold and sharp as the ice on the lake. The room stopped breathing. My father stared at me, shocked by the open defiance. Lydia's eyes narrowed to slits, realizing her husband's protection was failing. Then came the sound. A heavy thud as Margot placed her large steel bowl of peeled potatoes on the counter. She turned off the running water. The kitchen was plunged into a dead, dripping silence. She walked slowly from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel. She looked at Lydia. She looked at my father. She looked at me. Her eyes lingering for a second on the red mark on my cheek. Then she walked to the center of the room, right between Lydia and me. She reached behind her back, untied her floral apron, pulled it over her head, and folded it neatly. She placed it on the island. "Enough," she said. The word was a judgment. It was not just for Lydia. It was for my father, for his weakness. It was for the cousins, for their willful blindness. It was for the entire rotten system of family decency that had protected the abusers and silenced the victims for 15 years. "Margot, stay out of this," my father warned, his voice wavering. "This is family business." "This is my family," Margot said, her voice surprisingly strong. "And I'm done watching you all participate in this. I'm done watching you sacrifice Hannah's daughter to this thief." "How dare you!" Lydia shrieked, lunging forward. Margot didn't flinch. She simply reached into the pocket of her sensible cardigan and pulled out her old smartphone. "You're right, Kaylee," Margot said, her eyes locked on Lydia. "She is a thief, and she's not even a very smart one." She tapped the screen. A voice filled the kitchen. It was Lydia's voice, tinny and conspiratorial. "Don't care what the estimate says. Just bill the full $80,000. We'll run it through the Lakeside Solutions account." Lydia's blood drained from her face. Margot's thumb swiped, and another track played. This one was more recent. "No, the girl won't find out. She's too arrogant. Thinks she's too smart to be tricked. Just make sure the wire clears by Wednesday. As long as her signature is on that preliminary paper, the bank is covered. She's on the hook. Not us." It was the malicious intent Arthur Keene needed. It was the entire crime, confessed in her own arrogant voice. "Where did you get that?" Lydia whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "My phone has been recording audio in this kitchen every time I've been here for the past 6 months. Lydia," Margot said calmly, "it's amazing what you say when you think the help isn't listening." Lydia made a sound, a choked, animalistic noise, and she lunged. She clawed for the phone, trying to grab it, to smash it, to silence the voice that was ending her. But as she did, something else happened. The silent, frozen relatives, my uncle, my 2 cousins, all moved at once. They raised their own phones. Suddenly, the kitchen was lit by the blue glow of 4 recording screens, all pointed directly at Lydia as she tried to wrestle Margot for the evidence. They had been passive spectators to my humiliation, but they were active participants in the high-drama brawl. They were capturing the moment the Queen of Silverbrook was dethroned. "Put those down!" my father roared, waving his Scotch glass. "Stop recording! This is a family matter. Put them down!" No one listened. They just zoomed in, getting a tighter shot of Lydia's frantic, screaming face as Margot held the phone high above her head. Lydia froze, realizing she was not just being exposed. She was being documented. She was being turned into a meme, a viral video for the whole town to see. She backed away, her hands raised, her mind finally catching up to the catastrophe. I stepped forward. "It doesn't matter anyway." "Lydia," I said, my voice cutting through her panicked breathing. "That phone is just a copy. The original recording. along with the November Truth file, was uploaded to a secure server at 3 a.m. this morning. It's already in my lawyer's inbox, with instructions on what to do if I didn't contact him by noon today. Lydia turned to look at me, her eyes hollow. She was checkmated. The slap had been her last. Stupid move. The game was over. Margot lowered her phone. She looked at Lydia, who was now trembling, cornered between the staring relatives and the digital abyss. "Go fix your face, Lydia," Margot said, her voice flat. "You have guests arriving in 3 hours. Tonight, we are still going to eat Thanksgiving dinner. We are going to sit at that table, and we are going to be a family." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But after the meal, we are also going to have the truth." The transition from the house to the resort's grand dining room was surreal. We had walked through the snow-dusted path, connecting the main residence to the lodge in silence. A procession of ghosts marching toward a feast. Lydia had reapplied her lipstick. She had fixed her hair. She had put on a smile that looked like it had been stapled to her face. She was betting everything on the presence of the guests, the local business partners, the minority shareholders, the suppliers, to keep the peace. She believed that the Carmichael Code of Public Decency would hold, that we would not dare shatter the illusion in front of the town's elite. She was wrong. The dining room was spectacular. I had to give her that. The long tables were set with heavy linen, crystal glasses catching the light of the antler chandeliers, and a centerpiece of autumn leaves and gold-painted pumpkins that must have cost a fortune. There were about 30 people present. These were the people whose money and trust kept Carmichael Lakeside Retreats afloat. I sat at the far end of the main table, my laptop bag resting against my leg. The USB drive was already plugged into the wireless receiver that controlled the room's projection system. Lydia had set up a screen at the front of the room, intending to show renderings of the new spa. It was a standard part of her showmanship. She loved to dazzle the investors with pretty pictures while hiding the rotting foundation. We ate the first course in a tension that was so thick it felt physical. My father drank his wine too quickly. Trent was laughing too loudly at a joke made by a lumber supplier. Margot ate her soup methodically, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Then, the moment arrived. Lydia stood up. She tapped her spoon against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, clear ringing sound silenced the room. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice projecting with the practiced warmth of a seasoned politician. "It is such a joy to see so many beloved faces here tonight. Thanksgiving is a time for gratitude, but for the Carmichael family, this year it is also a time for looking forward." She placed a hand on Trent's shoulder. He beamed, straightening his tie. "As many of you know, we have been working tirelessly on a bold new vision for the resort, and I am so proud to announce that we are stepping into a new era. A generation of new leadership is rising, represented by my son, Trent, who will be taking over as Director of Operations starting next month." There was a scattering of polite applause. My father stared into his glass. "And," Lydia continued, her voice gaining momentum, "to support this vision, we have secured a significant financial package that will allow us to break ground on the Serenity Spa wing immediately. It is a solution that ensures our stability for decades to come." She picked up the remote control for the projector lying on the table. "I have a few images to share with you," she said, pointing the remote at the screen. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She frowned and pressed it again. The screen remained blank. "Oh, technology," she laughed nervously. "It always fails you when you need it. Trent, honey, can you check the connection?" "Actually, Lydia," I said, standing up. The room turned to me. I held up the identical remote control I had taken from the AV closet an hour earlier. "I think I have the control," I said, "and since we are talking about the financial package, I thought the shareholders might want to see the details of that bold solution you mentioned." Lydia froze, her eyes locked onto the remote in my hand. "Sit down. Kaylee," she hissed, her smile dropping for a fraction of a second. "This is not the time for your little charts." "I think it is exactly the time," I replied. I pressed the button. The screen behind her flared to life. It did not show a watercolor rendering of a spa. It showed a stark, black-and-white slide titled, Carmichael Lakeside Retreats, Current Debt Structure. In the center of the screen, in bold red font, was the number $4,500,000. Underneath it, in equally large letters, it read, Guaranteed by personal assets of Kaylee Walker via forged authorization. A gasp went through the room. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air right out of the hall. The silverware clatter stopped instantly. A wineglass was set down a little too hard, ringing against the table. Lydia stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "What is this?" Trent demanded, standing up, but he looked confused rather than angry. I clicked the remote again. The next slide appeared. It was a flowchart. It was the result of 3 weeks of forensic analysis by my team at Clearline. It showed the $4,500,000 entering the resort's main account, and then immediately splitting. I walked toward the front of the room, my voice calm, professional, the voice I used when presenting to board members in Minneapolis. As you can see, I said, using a laser pointer to trace the lines, the capital raised for the so-called spa is not sitting in a construction escrow account. It was transferred 48 hours ago. 30% went to pay off interest on previous unauthorized loans. 50% was transferred to an entity called Silverbrook Horizons LLC. I clicked again. A document appeared on the screen showing the registration for Silverbrook Horizons. And here we see the managing member of Silverbrook Horizons. I said, the name Lydia Carmichael was highlighted in yellow. The room was deadly silent. The investors were leaning forward, squinting at the screen. These were people who understood money. They understood fraud. They were looking at a diagram of their own investment being stolen. And the remaining 20%? I continued. It went to consulting fees for a company called Lakeview Crest, which, as you can see from this next slide, is also registered to Lydia's private condo address. Lydia finally found her voice. "This is a lie," she shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "She's made this up. She's jealous. She's trying to humiliate me. Turn it off. Daniel, turn it off." My father was sitting in his chair, his face the color of ash. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He did not move. He could not move. I ignored her. I clicked the remote one last time. "This is the most important slide," I said. The screen filled with a high-resolution image. On the left was my signature, taken from my driver's license and my actual employment contracts. On the right was the signature on the $4.5 million loan guarantee. I zoomed in. On the left, my E's loop loosely. On the right, they are tight and sharp. On the left, the pen pressure is light. On the right, it is heavy, indented. I turned to the room. "I did not sign this document," I said clearly. "My identity was used without my consent to secure a loan that is currently being funneled into Lydia Carmichael's private accounts. This is not a bold financial solution. It is bank fraud, and it is identity theft." A man sitting near the front, a local hardware store owner who held a small percentage of shares, stood up. His napkin fell to the floor. "Lydia," he said, his voice rough, "is this true? Did you sign her name?" Lydia looked around the room. She looked at the faces of the people she had charmed for years. They were not charmed anymore. They were horrified. It was an administrative error. Lydia stammered, backing away from the screen as if the light from the projector was burning her. "We were under a deadline. The bank needed the paper. Kaylee was in the city. She knew about it. She agreed in principle. It was just a placeholder." She was spiraling, admitting to the crime while trying to excuse it. Then Margot stood up. She did not need a remote. She did not need a slide. She just needed the silence. "A placeholder?" Margot said, her voice cutting through Lydia's babble. Margot walked out from behind the table. "Since when does an administrative error involve calling a contractor and telling him to hide invoices?" Margot asked. "Since when does a mistake involve telling your son that as long as the girl doesn't find out, The bank won't care? Lydia flinched as if Margot had struck her. We heard the tape. Lydia, Margot said, addressing the room but looking straight at her sister-in-law. We all heard it in the kitchen this morning. You didn't make a mistake. You made a plan. The room erupted into murmurs. The reality of what Margot was saying, that there was a recording, that this was premeditated, sank in. Trent, who had been standing near his mother, suddenly took a step back. He looked at the screen. He looked at the flowchart showing the money going to his mother's companies. He looked at the horrified faces of the investors. He did the math. Wait, Trent said, his voice shaking. He turned to his mother. Mom, you told me the lawyers handled everything. You said Kaylee signed the papers in Minneapolis. Lydia turned to him, her eyes wide and pleading. Trent, honey, don't listen to her. It's complicated. You don't understand business like I do. Is it true? Trent asked, his voice rising. Did you forge it? Because my name is on the operations documents. Mom, if this is fraud... He trailed off. The implication hung in the air. If this was fraud, he was an accessory. Lydia reached for him. Trent, please. Don't, Trent snapped, pulling his arm away. He looked at me, then back at his mother. Revulsion written all over his face. He backed away until he hit the wall. Lydia stood alone in the center of the room. Her husband was catatonic. Her son had abandoned her. Her stepdaughter had exposed her, and her investors were looking at her like she was a contagious disease. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to try one last lie, one last manipulation. But the double doors at the entrance of the dining room swung open with a heavy, resonant thud. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a figure who belonged to a different era of Silverbrook. He was an old man, leaning on a cane, wearing a wool coat that smelled of winter and old books, but his eyes were sharp, and his presence was commanding. It was Arthur Keene. He was not alone. Behind him stood a younger woman in a dark suit, holding a briefcase, and a uniformed county sheriff's deputy. The silence in the room changed. It went from the shock of a scandal to the terror of the law. Arthur walked into the room. The tap-tap-tap of his cane on the hardwood floor was the only sound. He stopped a few feet from the head table. He did not look at Lydia. He looked at me. Then he looked at my father. Daniel, Arthur said, his voice gravelly but distinct. I apologize for interrupting your dinner, but I am here on behalf of a client. My father looked up, confused. A client? Who? Arthur reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. He placed it gently on the table, right next to the untouched turkey. My client is Hannah Carmichael, Arthur said. A shiver went through the room. And based on the evidence provided to my office this afternoon, Arthur continued, looking slowly at the projection screen, the conditions of her trust have been met. I am here to execute her will. Arthur Keene stood in the doorway, a figure of absolute, unassailable authority. The deputy and the woman in the suit, who I assumed was a notary or a junior associate, remained just behind him, framing him in the doorway, their presence turning the dining room into an official chamber. Lydia, who had been the center of the room, was suddenly irrelevant. The collective gaze of the shareholders and family members shifted to the old man. Arthur, my father, Daniel, said, his voice a dry croak. He looked like he had seen a ghost. What? What is this? This is Thanksgiving. I am aware of the date, Daniel, Arthur said. He walked into the room, his cane tapping a slow, methodical rhythm on the oak floor. Tap, tap, tap. I am here, as I said, on behalf of a client who has been silent for a very long time. Lydia, recovering her bluster, stepped forward. This is a private party. You have no right to be here. Arthur, if this is about that ridiculous trust you manage, Daniel and I have told you we are not interested in revisiting it. Now please leave. You are upsetting our guests. Arthur stopped directly in front of the head table. He ignored Lydia, addressing my father but looking at the cream-colored envelope he held in his hand. "This," he said, "is a certified copy of the Hannah Carmichael Trust, a document I am sure you recall. Daniel, as you were present at its signing." My father flinched. "The terms of this trust," Arthur continued, his voice clear and precise, carrying to every corner of the silent room, "are very specific. My client, Hannah, stipulated that the assets within the trust were to remain dormant unless a very specific condition was met." He looked up from the envelope and his eyes, sharp and clear, found mine. "The condition for activation is, and I quote, the discovery of irrefutable proof that the beneficiary, Kaylee Walker, has been placed in gross financial peril or subjected to malicious liability by the managing partners of the Carmichael estate, defined as Daniel Carmichael or his spouse." A wave of understanding passed over the investors. They were looking at the PowerPoint slide still frozen on the screen. "Guaranteed by personal assets of Kaylee Walker. Forged authorization." Arthur turned his gaze to Margot. "Ms. Blake, my office received a significant data file from Ms. Walker this afternoon. However, the trust's clause requires proof of malicious intent, not just documentation. I was informed that you are in possession of such proof. A recording?" Margot, who had been watching Lydia like a hawk, nodded. "I am." "Ms. Blake played it for us in the kitchen this morning," I said, my voice ringing with a new, cold authority. "It's Lydia," in her own voice, explaining how she would use my forged signature to get the loan, and how, quote, "the girl won't find out." Arthur nodded, a grim, sad gesture. "That, I believe, satisfies the malicious liability clause. The trust is therefore active, effective as of this moment." "What does that mean?" the hardware store owner asked, his voice rough. Arthur did not answer him. Instead, he broke the red wax seal on the envelope with his thumb and pulled out a single, heavy sheet of paper. "When Hannah inherited the land for this lodge from her father," Arthur read, "she retained 30% of the total equity as her personal, private share, separate from the 51% she shared with her husband. Upon her death, that 30% share was placed into this trust for her daughter, Kaylee." The room was still. We were all doing the math. "And here," Arthur said, "is the activating clause. Upon the activation of this trust, the beneficiary, Kaylee Walker, will assume full control of the 30% equity. Furthermore, she is granted the immediate and unilateral right to sell this share to any third party of her choosing, without the consent of the other partners." A low whistle came from one of the suppliers. "But that's not all," Arthur said, his eyes finding Lydia. "Here is the bomba, as they say." He read again. "This 30% share, having been held in trust, is legally insulated. It cannot, now or ever, be used as collateral, security, or leverage for any debt incurred by the Carmichael Lakeside Retreats Corporation or its managing partners. Any such attempt, past or present, is hereby rendered null and void." No," Lydia screamed. It was not a word. It was a physical sound of pain, like a gunshot. "No, that's not legal. That's a conspiracy. She's been plotting this. She's been dead for 15 years and she's plotting against me." She lunged at the table, clawing at the paper. "This is unjust. Daniel, tell him. This is our company. She can't do this." "Ma'am," Arthur said, his voice hardening, "this document was filed with the state, signed, and notarized 15 years ago. Your husband was aware of the trust, as was his legal counsel at the time. It is, I assure you, ironclad." "Wait a minute." The voice came from Elaine Porter, a sharp, elegant woman in her 60s who was a major shareholder in several local businesses. She was looking at her tablet, her fingers flying. "Lydia," Elaine said, not looking up from her screen, "your control of this company was always based on your marriage to Daniel. You controlled his 51% controlling share. Is that correct?" "Of course, Elaine looked up, her eyes merciless. But his 51% is now the sole collateral on $4.5 million of fraudulent, defaulted debt. Any bank is going to seize those shares and liquidate them. They're worthless. Trent's shares are minor, which means... She turned to me. Kaylee's 30%, which is legally protected from the debt, is now the only valuable, unencumbered stake in this entire company. It's the controlling interest. The room exhaled. Lydia had not just lost the game. She had lost the entire board. "This brings me," Arthur said, his voice cutting through Lydia's choked sobs, "to my second point." He turned to Lydia, his face now grim. "The trust, Ms. Carmichael, is a civil matter. What you have done, however, is a criminal one." Lydia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. My office, upon receiving Ms. Walker's evidence of bank fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement, had a fiduciary and legal obligation to act, Arthur said. As of 2 o'clock this afternoon, a complete copy of the November Truth File was delivered to the State Financial Crimes Investigation Unit. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Given the time-sensitive nature of the wire transfers," Arthur said, looking at his watch, "I imagine a temporary freeze on all assets associated with Silverbrook Horizons LLC and Lakeview Crest Holdings was issued by a judge approximately 1 hour ago." As if summoned by a stage cue, Lydia's phone, sitting on the dining table next to her plate, began to buzz. It vibrated violently against the china, a loud, angry, insistent sound. She stared at it. The screen lit up. Bank of Minnesota. It stopped, then buzzed again. Caller ID, private number, her lawyer. It buzzed a third time. Bank of Minnesota. Lydia did not move. She was paralyzed, staring at the small, glowing rectangle that was signaling the end of her life. On the other side of the room, by the wall, Trent, who had been watching his mother with a look of pure, unadulterated horror, slowly pulled his own phone from his blazer pocket. His face was pale. He swiped the screen. I saw his thumb move, scrolling. I saw the moment his blood ran cold. He must have seen the alert. Account activity. Frozen. The shared account. The operations account. His name was on it. He looked at his mother, his face a mask of betrayal and terror. He was not a co-conspirator. He was just another one of her victims. A stupid, arrogant, gullible victim, and he was tied to her. While every eye in the room was on Lydia's buzzing phone, Trent did not run. He did not shout. He just left. He put his phone back in his pocket, turned, and slid out the double doors into the cold November night, abandoning his mother to the wreckage she had built. The dining room was a cacophony of hushed, panicked whispers from the investors. Lydia was weeping, her hands over her face, her shoulders shaking. My father was a statue, gray and broken, staring at the empty seat where his wife, Hannah, used to sit. In the middle of the chaos, Arthur Keene, the executor, turned to me. The room quieted, sensing the final shift in power. He looked at me with my mother's eyes, full of sorrow and strength. "Ms. Walker," he said, his voice gentle. "The trust is active. The power is now yours. Do you wish for me to begin the process of executing the sale of your 30% share?" I looked around the room. I looked at Lydia, a pathetic, broken figure. I looked at my father, a man I no longer recognized. I looked at the investors, the suppliers, the employees whose faces I saw in the crowd, all looking at me, their futures in my hand. I saw Margot. She was standing by the service door, her arms crossed, watching. She did not nod. She did not smile. She just watched, letting me make my own choice. I took a deep breath. The smell of the cold turkey and the congealing gravy filled my lungs. "I will make a decision, Mr. Keene," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "But this isn't about revenge. This is a catastrophe. There are employees here who need to be paid by the end of the month. There are people in this town who depend on this lodge." I looked at the mess Lydia had made, the trail of financial and emotional destruction. I won't make a decision tonight just to punish her. I need to figure out a way to save the people who are still innocent in this. The headlines hit the local papers 3 days after Thanksgiving. They were not subtle. Fraud allegations. Rock Carmichael Resort and Family Feud. Exposes financial scandal at Lakeside Lodge. The journalists, hungry for a scandal in our quiet county, camped out at the end of the long driveway leading to the main house, their camera lenses trained on the windows like snipers. I did not talk to them. I did not issue a statement. I did not go on social media to defend myself. My silence was strategic, a lesson I had learned from Arthur Keene. In a storm of noise, the person who stays quiet is the one who controls the narrative, because they are the only one not making mistakes. Lydia, predictably, took the opposite approach. She hired a defense attorney from St. Paul, a man named Sterling who wore suits that cost more than most of the resort staff made in a year. She gave exclusive interviews to friendly blogs and local radio stations, painting a picture of a grieving, misunderstood matriarch under attack. Her story was simple and disgusting. According to her, I was the jealous stepdaughter, bitter that my father had chosen Trent to lead the company. She claimed the slideshow at Thanksgiving was a doctored fabrication, a temper tantrum thrown by a woman who could not handle her own professional failures in the city. She spun the forged signature as a misunderstanding of verbal consent. There were people in Silverbrook who believed her. They wanted to believe her. Lydia had spent 15 years curating her image as the savior of the resort, the charitable hostess, the devoted wife. It was easier for them to believe that the ungrateful daughter was lying than to accept that the woman they had invited to their potlucks was a criminal. But the bank did not care about potlucks. On the 1st of December, the bank sent a formal notice. Due to the irregularities regarding the guarantor, me, and the subsequent investigation by the State Financial Crimes Unit, they froze a significant portion of the resort's operating credit. They demanded a full, transparent audit of every loan secured in the last 5 years. The freeze was immediate and brutal. It meant vendors could not be paid. It meant the food delivery trucks stopped coming. And most terrifyingly for the town, it meant payroll was in jeopardy. I was living in the guest room of Aunt Margot's small house on Elm Street. It was a stark contrast to my apartment in Minneapolis or the sprawling estate I had grown up in. It smelled of old wood and yeast. I slept on a twin mattress that sagged in the middle, and I woke up every morning to the sound of Margot starting her industrial mixer in the bakery downstairs. I kept my job at Clearline Orbit Analytics, transitioning to remote work. My boss, understanding the gravity of the situation after seeing my initial report, gave me the leeway I needed. So, by day, I was a high-level financial analyst, conducting meetings via video calls with a blurred background to hide Margot's floral wallpaper. By afternoon, I put on a plain white apron and helped Margot at the bakery, kneading dough and frosting cupcakes. It was in the bakery that I felt the town's eyes on me. Customers would come in for their morning crullers, and the conversation would stop the moment I walked from the back room to the counter. Some looked at me with pity. Others, the ones who had bought Lydia's story, looked at me with open hostility, as if I were the one starving the resort staff. One afternoon, Mrs. Gable, the head of housekeeping at the resort for 20 years, came in. She looked tired. Her uniform was wrinkled. She ordered a coffee, and when I handed it to her, she didn't take it immediately. "Is it true, Kaylee?" she asked quietly. "Is it true that we might not get our Christmas bonuses because you froze the accounts?" I looked at her, a woman who had known me since I was in braids. "I didn't freeze the accounts, Mrs. Gable," I said softly. "The bank did. Because the money for your bonuses wasn't in the account. It was in Lydia's private condo fund. I'm trying to find it so you can get paid." She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face. Then she nodded, took the coffee, and left. But the whispers didn't stop. My father called me every day, sometimes twice a day. I watched his name, Dad, flash on my phone screen until it went dark. I could not answer. I knew what he would say. He would beg. He would plead for peace. He would ask me to drop the lawsuit, to sign a retroactive agreement, to save the family name. He was terrified. He was watching his reputation, his business, and his marriage disintegrate, and he wanted me to fix it. But I could not fix what he had broken by looking the other way for a decade. Arthur Keene and his team were relentless. Now that the trust was active, they had legal standing to demand documents that Lydia had tried to bury. We discovered that Silverbrook Horizons was not the only shell. There were 3 other LLCs, all registered in the names of Lydia's distant relatives, a cousin in Wisconsin, a sister in Florida. She had been siphoning money out of the resort for years, hiding it in these accounts under the guise of consulting fees and supply chain management. It was textbook embezzlement, done with the arrogance of someone who believed no one would ever check the math, because the only person capable of checking it, me, had been pushed out of the family. Arthur told me on a Tuesday evening, sitting in Margot's kitchen, that the state prosecutor was looking at criminal charges, not just fraud, money laundering. "It's going to get ugly." "Kaylee," Arthur said, sipping Margot's tea, "Lydia is backed into a corner. She is going to start throwing people under the bus to save herself. And the first person she's going to throw is Trent." Trent. I hadn't seen Trent since he walked out of the dining room on Thanksgiving night. He had vanished. He wasn't at the resort. He wasn't at the house. Rumor had it he was crashing on a friend's couch in a neighboring town, hiding from the reporters and his mother. 2 days later, I got a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "I need to talk to you. Please, meet me behind the Super One grocery store at 9 p.m. Alone." I knew it was him. I showed the text to Margot. She frowned. It could be a trap. "He's not smart enough for a trap." I said, "He's scared." I drove to the Super One parking lot. It was a desolate place at 9 at night, illuminated by a single flickering sodium streetlight. The air was biting cold. The first real freeze of December settling in. I saw Trent's car, a flashy sports coupe that looked ridiculous covered in road salt, parked near the dumpsters. He was standing outside, smoking a cigarette. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a hoodie. He looked 10 years older than he had at Thanksgiving. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a shivering, twitchy anxiety. I parked and got out, keeping the engine running. I walked toward him, my hand in my coat pocket, gripping my phone. I had already started the voice memo app. Minnesota is a one-party consent state. As long as I was part of the conversation, I could record it legally. Trent tossed the cigarette away when he saw me. He didn't say hello. "They froze my accounts." "Kaylee," he said, his voice shaking. "The joint account with Mom, the operations account, even my personal savings. I can't buy gas. I can't buy food. That happens when you're under investigation for bank fraud." "Trent," I said coldly. "I didn't know," he shouted, then lowered his voice, looking around nervously. "I didn't know she was forging your name. I swear. She just told me the financing was secured. She told me to sign the papers as the new director of operations. I just signed where she pointed." "Did you read them?" I asked. He looked down at his sneakers. "No, she's my mom. She said she had the lawyers handle it. I thought we were finally going to make the place huge." I looked at him. He was pathetic. A 30-year-old man-child who had been happy to take the title and the salary, but too lazy to read the contracts. "Ignorance isn't a defense. Trent," I said, "your signature is on the documents that authorize the transfer of funds to Silverbrook Horizons. You are the director of operations. Legally, you authorize the embezzlement." He looked up, his eyes wet with panic. "I'm going to go to jail." "Aren't I?" "She's telling her lawyer that I was the one running the day-to-day, that I was the one who set up the vendors. I heard her on the phone yesterday. She's pinning it on me. Kaylee, she's saying I went rogue." I felt a surge of disgust. Lydia was truly a monster. She was willing to sacrifice her own son, the golden child she had paraded around for years, just to keep herself out of prison for a few more months. "She will destroy you. Trent," I said, "she will let you take the fall for everything." He started to cry. It was a jagged, ugly sound. "What do I do? You have to help me. You own the place now, right? Can't you just tell them I didn't know?" "I can't help you. Trent, The FBI doesn't care what I think. They care about evidence. I stepped closer. But you can help yourself. He looked at me, wiping his nose on his sleeve. How? You have access to her email, don't you? You have the passwords to the operations server. You have the text messages she sent you telling you to sign those papers without reading them. He nodded slowly. If you cooperate, I said, choosing my words carefully, if you go to Arthur Keene tomorrow morning and give him everything, every email, every text, every password, and if you agree to testify that she directed you to sign those documents, the prosecutor might be lenient. They want the architect. Trent, not the pawn. He stared at me. You want me to rat on my mom? She is already ratting on you, I reminded him. She is writing the narrative right now that says you stole the money. He shivered violently. It wasn't just the cold. It was the realization that his easy life was over. He had to choose. Betray the mother who raised him to be useless, or go to prison for her crimes. I'm recording this conversation. Trent, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. He flinched. What? I'm recording this, which means I have you on tape admitting that you signed the documents, even if you claim you didn't read them. That's an admission of negligence at best, and conspiracy at worst. I held the phone up. I am going to send this file to Arthur in 5 minutes. If you aren't at his office by 8 a.m. tomorrow with your laptop and your passwords, this recording goes to the state prosecutor as evidence of your guilt. If you are there, and you cooperate, we hand it over as evidence of your coercion. It was cruel. It was the kind of hardball tactic Lydia would have used. But I wasn't playing for sympathy anymore. I was playing to end this. Trent looked at the phone, then at me. He looked defeated. The arrogance that had filled the dining room on Thanksgiving was gone, dissolved by the winter wind. I'll be there, he whispered. Good, I said. I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't look back. As I drove away, I saw him standing there under the flickering light, a solitary figure in the snow, realizing that the family empire he thought he was inheriting was actually a prison cell. I sent the file to Arthur immediately. The next morning, Trent showed up. He brought everything. He brought his laptop, his phone, and a box of paper files he had taken from Lydia's home office while she was sleeping. The evidence was devastating. There were emails from Lydia explicitly instructing him to bypass the accounting department. There were texts where she mocked my father for being soft. There were drafts of the forged documents where she practiced my signature. With Trent's cooperation, the case went from strong to airtight. The prosecutor formally offered Trent a plea deal, probation and community service in exchange for full testimony against Lydia. He took it without hesitation. By the second week of December, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grim, waiting silence. The snow had come in earnest now, blanketing Silverbrook in white. The town looked like a Christmas card, but the mood was heavy. I stood on the porch of Margot's house late one evening, looking toward the lake, through the bare trees. I could see the lights of Carmichael lakeside retreats in the distance. Usually, at this time of year, the resort would be blazing with holiday lights. There would be a massive tree in the courtyard, and the windows of the main lodge would be glowing warm and inviting. Tonight, the resort was dim. Only the security lights were on. The Serenity Spa construction site was a dark scar of mud and idle machinery, surrounded by yellow caution tape that snapped in the wind. The bank had halted all construction. The guests had canceled their reservations. It looked like a dying thing. But as I watched, I felt a strange sense of calm. The rot was being cut out. It was painful. It was ugly. It was destroying the facade my father had tried so hard to maintain, but it was necessary. Lydia was still in the main house, alone now. My father was sleeping in the guest room, or maybe he was just drinking in his study. I didn't know. I hadn't spoken to him. The real storm hadn't hit yet. The snow falling around me was soft and quiet. The storm that was coming would be loud. It would happen in a courtroom in the county seat. It would involve a judge, a jury, and the public dismantling of 15 years of lies. I zipped up my coat and turned back to the warmth of Margot's kitchen. I was ready. I wasn't the girl making pies in the kitchen anymore. I wasn't the financial shield. I was the owner, and I had work to do. The county courthouse was not built for drama, but on that Tuesday in March, it was the hottest ticket in town. The civil hearing room was packed, a standing room-only crowd of Silverbrook residents, a few sheepish-looking reporters from the city, and a large, anxious contingent of resort staff. Their faces grim. They were not here for justice. They were here to find out if they still had jobs. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Arthur Keene and Margot. Margot was not a lawyer, but Arthur had insisted she sit with us. As a representative of the truth, Lydia sat at the defense table. She looked smaller. Her expensive blazer hung on her, and her hair, while still perfectly coiffed, seemed brittle. Her lawyer, Sterling, was a shark, shuffling papers with aggressive confidence. My father, Daniel, sat in the front row, not at her side. He sat alone, a man in a rumpled suit, looking at no one. "We are here," the judge began, her voice echoing in the wood-paneled room, "to hear petition 704, Walker versus Carmichael, regarding the disputed liability for a $4.5 million loan and the activation of the Hannah Carmichael Trust." For the next 2 hours, Arthur Keene laid out the case. He was not a showman. He was a historian. He spoke in a slow, methodical voice, and with every word, he dismantled Lydia's 15-year reign. He started with the trust. He presented the original document, signed by my mother, witnessed by my father, and notarized by Arthur himself. He established it as a legal, binding instrument. Then he moved to the malicious liability. He put my presentation, the November Truth File, up on the courtroom projector. The same flowcharts that had silenced the Thanksgiving dinner now glowed under the fluorescent lights of the court. He showed the LLCs, the wire transfers, the consulting fees paid to Lydia's sister in Florida. Finally, he addressed the forgery. "Your Honor, the defense will claim this was a simple administrative error, that my client, Ms. Walker, gave implied consent, but intent is the key, is the yachts so." He signaled to the clerk, "I would like to play Exhibit B, a recording made by Ms. Margot Blake in the Carmichael kitchen on the morning of Thanksgiving." Lydia's head snapped up. Sterling half rose from his chair. "Objection. This recording is an invasion of privacy." "Overruled," the judge said, her eyes fixed on Arthur. "Minnesota is a one-party consent state. Ms. Blake was present. Proceed. Mr. Keene." The audio filled the room. It was Lydia's voice, clear as day, discussing the wire transfer, the contractors, and the plan. As long as her signature is on that preliminary paper, the bank is covered. She's on the hook, not us. A wave of murmurs swept the room. The judge banged her gavel for silence. "And," Arthur said, "Exhibit C, a recording of a conversation between my client and Mr. Trent, Ms. Carmichael's son, in which he confirms he was instructed to sign documents he was not allowed to read." Sterling, Lydia's lawyer, stood up for his rebuttal. He was smooth. He argued that it was all a misunderstanding. He painted Lydia as a wife trying to save her husband's family business, a woman who had to make hard choices under pressure. "This is not a case of fraud," he boomed. "This is a case of family, and families are messy." Kaylee Walker, a high-powered analyst, clearly gave verbal consent for her mother to manage these affairs, and now, in a fit of jealousy over her stepbrother, she is trying to burn the whole house down. The judge looked at me. "Ms. Walker, did you give your stepmother verbal consent to sign a $4.5 million loan on your behalf?" I stood up. My voice was clear. "No, Your Honor, I did not." The judge turned back to Sterling. "Then I suggest you move on. Counselor, implied consent does not apply to wire fraud." The verdict came swiftly. The judge read her decision from the bench, her voice leaving no room for interpretation. "On the court finds that the signature of Kaylee Walker on the loan document was a forgery, and that this action was taken with malicious intent and without her consent. 2. Ms. Walker is hereby absolved of any and all liability related to this $4.5 million debt. The loan is now the sole responsibility of the corporation and its managing partner who authorized it, Mr. Daniel Carmichael. My father let out a small, broken sound. 3, the judge continued. The court confirms that the gross financial peril clause of the Hannah Carmichael Trust has been met. The trust is active, and Ms. Walker is the full legal owner of her 30% unencumbered share. Lydia was crying, silent, angry tears. As for the evidence of embezzlement, money laundering, and bank fraud, the judge said, looking sternly at Lydia, this court finds the evidence credible and deeply disturbing. This is a civil court. I have no power to sentence you, but you can be assured, Ms. Carmichael, that a full transcript of this hearing, along with Mr. Keene's exhibits, is being transferred to the state prosecutor's office. Your criminal trial will be, I suspect, far less pleasant. Lydia slumped in her chair, a broken woman. But the drama was not over. As the judge banged her gavel, Elaine Porter, the investor from the Thanksgiving dinner, stood up. Your Honor, she said, if this hearing is concluded, may I be the first to address Ms. Walker as the new controlling partner? The judge, surprised, nodded. Elaine turned to me. Ms. Walker, I represent a small consortium of local business owners. We, too, are invested in Silverbrook. We are appalled by what has happened, but we believe the resort itself and its employees are worth saving. She nodded to an associate, who handed me a folder. This is an offer, Elaine said, her voice projecting to the entire room. To buy out the entire Carmichael Lakeside Retreats. We will absorb the $4.5 million debt. We will honor the contracts of every employee. We will fund the Hannah Carmichael scholarship you proposed. We will save this town's largest employer, but our offer is contingent on one thing. She looked from me to Lydia, and then to my father. We take 100% ownership. The Carmichael family, in all its forms, is out, completely. The room was silent. This was the twist. This was the way out. Not a fiery, vengeful sale, but a clean, decisive amputation. I looked at the folder. I looked at Arthur, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I looked at Margot, who gave me a small, sad smile. I looked at my father. He was staring at me, his eyes pleading. He was about to lose everything, his business, his legacy, his name. I turned back to Elaine. I accept. The signing was done in a sterile conference room down the hall. My father sat at one end of the table, Lydia at the other. I sat with Elaine. My father, his hand shaking, signed first, relinquishing his 51% for $1, a symbolic payment to avoid the bank seizing it. Lydia, on the advice of her lawyer, signed away her spousal claim to the worthless shares, hoping it would look good to the prosecutor. Then it was my turn. I signed my 30% share over to Elaine's group. They cut me a check, the numbers of which I already knew. It was done. My mother's legacy was finally safe, not because it belonged to me, but because it no longer belonged to them. As we filed out of the room, my father caught up to me in the hallway. Kaylee, he whispered. He looked like a stranger, his face gray and papery. Kaylee, what am I supposed to do now? I stopped and looked at him. I searched my heart for anger, for pity, for the love I used to feel. I just found a profound, aching sadness. I don't know, Dad, I said. I don't wish you unhappiness. I truly don't. I just can't be the one to clean up the wreckage anymore. I turned and walked away, joining Margot at the end of the hall, and I did not look back. Lydia left the courthouse alone. Sterling was already in his car. Trent, having taken his plea deal, had moved to a different city, trying to disappear from the shadow of his mother's crimes. 1 year later. It was Thanksgiving. The air in Margot's kitchen was thick with the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon. The television in the living room was blaring a football game. I was rolling out a pie crust, my hands covered in flour. Margot came up beside me, holding a basting brush. She looked at me, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Just so you know," Margot said, "if anyone slaps you in this kitchen this year, I am throwing this entire 20-pound turkey at their head." I laughed. It was not a small, tight laugh. It was a real, deep, open-throated laugh. The sound of something that had been broken finally healing over. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was an email from Arthur Keene. I wiped my hands and opened it. It was brief. "Dear Kaylee, just wanted to let you know the final file was closed today. Ms. Carmichael pled guilty to 2 counts of financial fraud to avoid a jury trial. She received significant financial penalties and is barred from holding any corporate officer position in this state for 5 years. The case is officially over. Happy Thanksgiving to you and Margot. A." I closed the email. It was over. My life was different now. I was still at Clearline Orbit Analytics, but I had been promoted to director. I had also, with Margot's encouragement, started a small, freelance consultancy on the side. I worked with small businesses in Silverbrook, the bakery, the hardware store, the diners. I helped them read their own numbers. I taught them how to set up their books, how to spot predatory loans, how to use their financials not as a weapon, but as a shield. I put my phone away and went back to the pie. Later that evening, after the meal, I stood on Margot's small front porch. The air was cold and crisp. Through the trees, in the distance, I could see the lights of the lodge. It had a new name now. The Silverbrook Inn. It was owned by Elaine's group. Mrs. Gable was still the head of housekeeping, and the scholarship in my mother's name had just paid its first tuition for a finance student at the local community college. The lights were on. The guests were checking in. It was alive. The screen door creaked open, and Margot stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood next to me, and we looked at the lights together. That apron, it had once been a symbol of her quiet servitude, but in my mind, it would forever be the symbol of her power, the armor she wore, and the armor she knew exactly when to take off. Family isn't built on silence and debt. It's built by the people who dare to stand in a kitchen on Thanksgiving morning, take off their apron, and choose the truth, even when the truth destroys everything familiar. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.